Welcome to the Unworthy Leader Podcast, a show that shatters the illusion of perfect leadership. Here we expose the flaws, doubts, and insecurities behind the titles, proving that true leadership isn't about being worthy. It's about owning your unworthiness and leading anyway. If you're tired of the polished facades, you've come to the right place. You'll hear the raw truth from leaders you admire and trust. I'm Kendra Dahlstrom, your host and executive coach to the Fortune 500 C-suite. Let's get started. I'd like to welcome Becca Chambers to the Unworthy Leader Podcast today. Becca is a former Chief Communications Officer and now has moved into a Chief Marketing Officer role, as well as holding the title of the #1 female marketing and sales voice on LinkedIn, as well as several other boards in which she participates. It's a pleasure to have you here today, Becca, and to join us on discussing this topic around self-doubt and imposter syndrome and how it shows up as a leader. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. I am happy to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself any more than what I just said? Is there anything I left out that's important?
I'll give you the high level. I have been in brand and communications for the last 20 years. I have raging ADHD and it comes out in everything that I do, and I talk about it a lot, and I like to tell people that when I meet them. So I'll introduce myself to the podcast that way because you'll hear me ramble and lose my train of thought sometimes, but that's just part of who I am. I live in the Bay Area. I have a couple of kids, also neurodivergent kids, so that comes up in my conversations a lot too. And I'm really excited to be here, so thank you.
That's so wonderful. And I love your authenticity and your openness and vulnerability and sharing that. I think my perception as somebody who works as an executive coach with leaders and then also being on the front lines in a business is it's so refreshing when a leader comes in and is just able to sort of say, look, this is who I am. I'm not going to make any apologies for that. And let's figure out how to work together. When was it that you first found that you were able to actually start expressing that externally without shame or guilt?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I ever stopped feeling the shame entirely because I still hear things like, that's going to make it harder for you to get a job. And of course, like everybody comes with their judgment. So I will caveat with it never totally goes away. But my comfort level with sharing who I am authentically, I guess, came probably just before the pandemic even. And I would say the pandemic helped embolden me to kind of be myself. But I had a boss, a CMO that I was reporting to, and I was in a job where I was feeling a little bit over my skis and, the imposter syndrome was huge. And I was constantly in a room with the C-suite as the comms leader. And I was furiously typing one day on my keyboard. And I think the CEO or somebody said something along the lines of, Becca, are you even paying attention? Or, made some comment. And my boss, the CMO at the time, who I didn't even know cared that much about me or saw me in that way, clapped back at him and said something to the effect of, let Becca do her thing. I promise you, she might not look like she's paying attention like the rest of us, but she is 10 steps ahead of us. She's running circles around us right now. And whatever she comes up with is going to be better than we could have anticipated. And it was this like jaw-dropping moment for me because somebody had just advocated for me in a way that I didn't even know I needed to advocate for myself. Like I didn't recognize that in myself. Like I knew that I was a little bit quirky and unbuttoned compared to the other executives in the room, but I didn't realize that anybody actually saw the fact that what I was doing was just the way that I needed to work to do my best job. And they were defending me for that. And after that, I was like, why am I ashamed of the way that I do my work when the outcomes that I'm driving are better than everybody else? I don't understand why somebody who is doing better work would feel bad about the way they do it. And I was just stuck in this kind of cycle in my brain of how do I just do it the way that I want to do it? And so I did. And I started, my teams got larger and I started leading in the way that I wanted to be led, which was, hey guys, here are the outcomes we're trying to drive. I don't care how you do them. Go and do them your best. Like figure out novel ways of doing it. I don't care, but let's get kick-ass results. And after that, the team the teams I was building were so much more productive, and not even just productive. We were really tight, right? We were close. We had a lot of psychological safety. Plenty of people have followed me to like 2, 3 companies, more even, because we just have this openness. And I think the feedback from other people helped embolden me to feel more safe and secure in showing who I am. And the haters are going to hate, but I'm still doing really good work, and I'm building really good teams, and I'm driving really good outcomes for the companies that I work at. And who cares if that looks a little bit different, or if I'm bouncing around in a meeting, or if I'm clacking on my keyboard, right? Or even scribbling.
Right.
Like I had a couple of jobs ago, I reported to the CEO, and, at all of the leadership offsites, I would be frantically scribbling, and everybody there was totally cool with it. And it was because I had just told them beforehand, guys, if I'm scribbling, it allows me to like focus my brain on you while my hand is doing something. And then I don't have to daydream or whatever. And everyone was cool with that. And if I hadn't said it, if I hadn't said, this is why I'm doing that, people would have looked at me like, why is this woman just drawing the whole time? Is she even present? And so that, all of these things just helped make me feel more comfortable. And then of course, other people telling me like, thank you for being a voice in this and normalizing neurodiversity.
Wow, that's such a powerful story. I had chills while you were saying it. And so I really heard 2 things. One is that leader that stood up for you and advocated for you really saw something in yourself that it sounds like you hadn't even seen yet. Like you hadn't even had the moment or time to step back and look and see that for yourself. So he really helped you see that in yourself, which is so empowering and such a wonderful thing. And the other thing I heard was that your vulnerability not only has created great trust in these relationships that you have, and so people have followed you, but you've also just been able to be a better leader because you were vulnerable and said, hey, I'm going to scribble. Don't take it personally, but this is how I'm going to be processing the information in which you share and give me. It actually means I'm engaged versus what you may assume, right? That I'm not engaged. And so that vulnerability really was a strength.
And it gives other people power to do the same, right? So one thing I do is my team will email me or they'll Slack me, and I will see it and I'll forget to respond because I have ADHD, and that happens. And they know that. So they know that pinging me again or emailing me again isn't annoying. They know that that's actually helpful. And if they didn't know I had ADHD, they wouldn't do that. They would be like, well, I don't want to bug the boss. She's not responding to my emails for a reason, right? No, I'm not responding to your emails because my brain forgot that they existed. And you reminding me is good. And us having that open communication allows us to do our jobs better, to be a more productive team. And I have a really hard time when I talk to people who are, most people who don't tell their teams or their bosses that they're neurodivergent or any health issue or any difference that they have. And they're spending so much effort trying to hide that effort is not going into their work or into whatever else they're doing. And it's wasted. It's wasted effort that, I don't know. And I think you were right when you say this boss saw something in me. She also was the first person who didn't just say, Becca has so much potential if she would just, right? And there was that in my life. She was just like, Becca's awesome how she is. Let's just let her do it the way she needs to do it. And that was just this aha moment. Totally.
So empowering. And thank you for reviewing how it felt for you, because I think it's so important for listeners to understand, the topic of this podcast is unworthiness and the different manifestations it can take in our lives. Sometimes we experience it as self-doubt. Sometimes it's full-blown imposter syndrome. I personally believe it's contextual, and we vacillate depending on the circumstances in our life and what we're going through and who we're with and all those things. And I can only imagine in those moments up until, that your manager made that comment, you felt like you had to hide it, it sounds like. And so can you want to explain sort of how that manifested for you, or any sort of self-doubt you had in your own capability?
Yeah. My entire academic career, I have 2 master's degrees, by the way, I thought I was stupid. Like I thought I was dumb until I was in my 30s. Like, what is that? I was getting straight A's, distinction at the London School of Economics, which is like a prestigious university. And I felt like an idiot. All my peers were so much smarter than me. And it's like, why did I feel that way? It was just because I did things differently than most people. And because they could go sit in class and absorb from a teacher who talked at them, I can't learn that way. I have to go do things with my hands, or I have to go research it myself, or go do a deep dive when I'm under pressure, because that's how my brain works. And so I just had this kind of like nagging, God, you're such a loser. You're such a slacker. If you could just, that's the kind of like thing of my life, try harder, talk less, act more like everybody else. And so I spent most of my life observing people and trying to act like them. And what does that do? That strips you away of your own identity. And when you have talents and skills, that takes away those talents and skills, because you are dulling yourself to be like everybody else. And when you're neurodivergent, it means that your brain, it's not neurodeficient, it's just different. Neurodivergent is different from the norm. And I actually find that that makes me wickedly smart in lots of ways, and wickedly smart in ways I would never give up. I would take the inability to remember somebody's name, or to make eye contact, or to struggle doing my laundry. And those are, small things. There are much larger, really systemic, hard things about having ADHD. And I don't want to make light of that. But the genius that comes with it and the stuff that makes me me is well worth the pain that comes with it. And I think that as I've gotten older and gotten more comfortable with my identity and did less of the looking around and being like, how do I be like everybody else? And instead say, how do I differentiate from everybody else? Because as a marketer, also, that's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to differentiate your brand in the market. Why would I want to be like everybody else? In fact, when I'm not like everybody else, I do better. I sell more. I sell more of me when I am more of me. And I think it's been just such a kind of joyful identity awakening the past 5 years. And part of that has been because of my kids. A part of it has just been I struggled as a child feeling like a freak, like a loser, like the dumb kid, only because I was different and I didn't have anybody to kind of be like, you know what, this part sucks. But whatever you decide to do when you grow up, I promise you're going to be better at it than everybody else. That's all I needed to hear. Because the whole time all I was hearing was, if you would just do this thing, you would be good at something. And it's like, why was I so stupid for 30 years? And now I'm just happen to be great at my job now? I don't think so. I think it was that I was being put in a box all those years that was just not the box that I was meant to be in. I actually started writing a post today with an Albert Einstein quote. Let me see if I can find it really quick, because I feel like it's so apropos right now to what we're talking about. It is widely quoted as Einstein. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Duh. Like, that's where I'm at. And that is the only message that I care about my kids hearing. That's it. People are judging you right now by your ability to climb a tree. You're a fish. Wait until you get to swim and watch how you do against the monkeys who are climbing the tree. You are going to outswim all of those monkeys. And I just, it makes me like choke up to think about it. But it is the reason, like, if you can be seen and know that somebody sees you, it makes all the difference.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and your heart and your passion that drives you. And so many of us, I believe, have these lived experiences, and that's what drives us. And I really hear that in your story. And, obviously now that it's manifesting in your children, right? That's such a motivator for us. And
it's interesting because my husband is probably neurotypical. We assume that he's neurotypical. Sometimes we wonder, but he doesn't relate to my kids in the way that I do, especially my son, who is like my little mini. And there are so many things that are very challenging about his academics, about just being a really ADHD kid. And because I get him and because I see him, it creates this like total change in the energy of the house, just because the kid knows that, like, I don't know, that he has somebody who, even when things are all going sideways, there is somebody who gets it and who can go sit with him at the end of the day and be like, what a shitty day, but oh my God, let's talk about it. And I can share my experience and be like, I felt exactly like that, or I do feel exactly like that. And he knows that. And that, again, like, that's everything, right? Just knowing there's somebody who gets you. And I think that's kind of where this goes in the workplace too, is just being a voice for people. So I'm a representation of somebody who is like this, who is still successful and is still able to do all of the things that everybody else does. Sometimes better, often better.
Oh, I have no doubt of that. I heard in your story that one thing that got you through this hard time was leaning into your differentiator and using that as your superpower. And so it sounds like that's what you're doing with your children too. Do you want to describe a little bit of what that process looks like for you?
For sure. It's actually the advice that I give, when people say like, what would you tell your younger self? Like, that's it. Like, figure out what makes you different and lean into that. And I always try to like not echo even just for my kids, but to everybody, like, it is the ultimate thing in marketing. What is your brand? What is your message? What is the thing about you that makes you special? And I feel like for some reason in society, we do the opposite, right? Everybody wants to fit in all the time. And I get that. Nobody wants to feel like an outsider. They don't want to be pointed at as different. But as we grow in our careers or in school or whatever, not everybody has to be good at basketball, right? Not everybody has to be good at math. Like, some people are good at some things. And it's just such an obvious thing. And yet we spend so much energy trying to do things like everybody else or dress like everybody else or act or talk or whatever. And I think I found like if you look at it from a marketing perspective in the like, how do you become the person who gets promoted? How do you become the person who gets a job? How do you become the person who gets referred for whatever? It's people enjoying your brand, people liking your brand being top of mind. It's all of the same things as marketing. So what makes you different? Like, double down on that thing and harness it and make it, make it you, I guess. Like, don't be the round peg in a square hole. Be the round peg in a round hole. Go find a round hole.
I needed to personally hear that. One of the things with my journey is that I've been wanting to launch a podcast for a few years. And the one thing that held me back was I don't have enough of a following. Like, who's going to listen to me? Everyone and their brother has a podcast now and all these things. And then I went through sort of this whole health scare that pretty much resulted in a near-death experience. And I came out of that, Becca, with this feeling of like, I have nothing to fear anymore.
Right.
Like, why not, And then I thought of this idea of why not create a title of a podcast? Most people would say, oh, the unworthy leader, you should title it what you want people to be, not what you want them to fear. But what I wanted to do is actually create a very visceral reaction deep down inside of somebody who has experienced that fear that draws them to it, but they're kind of afraid to be drawn to it, and intentionally try to crack this nut for myself publicly by talking to people like you. And not feeling like I have to have all the answers. I have a lot of expertise, and working with leaders as a coach and a consultant over the years, working in some very high profile companies. I have my own lived experience to share, but I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a double PhD by any means. But why do I feel like I have to be those things in order to do this? Like, why don't I just publicly sort of try to crack this nut and invite people like you, and we can all learn from each other? And so I thought at the same time of like, being vulnerable and taking a chance and launching a podcast before I felt like I was ready, I'm also sort of exposing my own laundry and trying to figure this out for myself publicly. It's almost like a reality show of podcasts, which I don't think is really out there yet. So I hear what you just said, because to me, it's like, okay, I'm doing the right thing because it's what feels good to me.
When is it ever going to be the right time? It's literally never going to be the right time. And to your point, you had a near-death experience. Oh my God, right? Like, clearly it's never the right time. It's always the right time. And I change as part of my ADHD. I hate transitions and whatever, but like, if you don't do it scared, like, you're not going to do it at all, right? If you just do everything that's easy and whatever, you're just going to be the person who does the same thing their whole life and is bored, or maybe they're fulfilled, but like, risk-taking is how you learn things, right? And to your point, you're kind of doing it out loud. That's how I am building my brand on LinkedIn, is just kind of in this like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. And literally, what is the worst that can happen?
That's right.
You might embarrass yourself, but like a podcast, you're recording it. You can edit it, like there is no worth that nobody will watch. I have to remind myself of that frequently. It's actually one of the biggest like exercises I do with my team all the time, because the fear is what stops people from taking chances, the fear of failure. And I hate failure. I don't think you'll meet somebody who hates failure more than I do. But I also recognize that if you can't try things, you're never going to innovate. Nothing's going to get better. Nothing's going to be different. And you're never going to be different. Like, you're never going to differentiate. And it goes back to what you said, like, when is the time going to be right? Like, it's not. So just do it. And, make a name for the podcast. That's step one. It's like, just do one thing. Every time you have a little energy for it, do one thing that gets you a little bit closer, and then you're doing it, right? And by the way, to your unworthy leader title, I think it's great because it is differentiating, right? It is not talk about, it is the premise of the podcast, but to your point, it creates an emotion, which is the point.
You mentioned failure. So like, how do you define failure, Becca?
Well, how I would define it I would never write this down and advise this as like a leadership principle, but how it actually manifests in my own mind is if it doesn't go the way I expected it to go, it's a failure. And that's ridiculous because half the time when something doesn't go the way you expect it to go, it ends up better than you expected it to go. So
Right.
We shouldn't frame that as a failure. Should just be something, that's a success. And the other should be a learning, right? It should be like, okay, that didn't work. What didn't work? Let's adjust and do it differently. That is how I deal with failure at work with my kids, things like that, right? Like really practically, well, that didn't work. No harm, no foul. Let's figure out what didn't work. Let's fix it and do better next time. Easy peasy. But when it's like, okay, my personal whatever, I couldn't accomplish this thing that I wanted to do, I will let that eat my soul all day, every day. I will ruminate on it. I will fall asleep thinking about it, wake up thinking about it. I will let it suck my soul, things that don't even matter sometimes. So it totally sways from failure for me can be as simple as, well, that didn't work. Let's learn and do better. Or it can be, that didn't go the way I expected. And now I am a loser and I'm going to think about it for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's the context for many of us is that we set these expectations, and if it falls short, even if society tells us it's great, then we're a failure. And I mean, I think we see that all the time. And I mean, anybody who's high functioning, but especially if you look at visible people like actors, singers, or professional athletes, like they can still be at the top of their game, but they lose a Super Bowl, they're a failure. It's like, really? I mean, that it's just because you expected an outcome and you didn't get it. Are you really a failure? So I really love that you shared that. And I think it's really important that we look at our own lens and like how realistic is our lens, right? As we're evaluating these things, how much of that do you think is societal, like was impressed upon us?
I don't know. I have a hard time judging what other people see as normal because things that like failure, people with ADHD often have something called rejection sensitive, RSD for short. So I have raging RSD, which means that somebody could give me feedback or just say something and I could interpret it as negative and I will let it eat at my soul. The same thing is true for failure. I'm a perfectionist. And so not accomplishing things triggers my RSD in like a very not healthy way. And I am aware of it, right? I'm talking about it. Then that's what matters. I can kind of keep it in check, but it does skew my view because I don't know how normal people, neurotypical people kind of judge their own failure. And if that comes from an intrinsic thing or if it comes from societal pressure. They do, I think, people theorize that RSD develops in people with ADHD because they are corrected for so much during their childhood that they develop this everything anyone says to them feels like a correction or an insult or you need to do this. If you could just... And so they develop this reaction. And I totally buy into that, in which case, yes, it is shaped by society. And it would be very healthy if we could all look at failures as like, well, that didn't work. Let's move on. And of course, if you're a surgeon, that is not an option, right? But I'm a marketer. And so like, if something goes wrong, I mean, it's not an emergency, really, right? Nobody's dying, probably. And I think that's another thing is like, let's think about the context of our failures, right? Like if I fail at, parenting one day because my kid's flipping out and I scream at him, that's a parenting failure, but we can go and I can apologize and we can move on from that. If it is like, every single day and I'm just a terrible parent, that is a systemic failure. And I don't know, that's big. You can't really come back from that. So I think context matters too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think as we move through self-doubt and don't allow it to stop us, even though it exists and we have it, if it leads to what we would call, quote unquote, a failure, I love your point on it's really just learning.
Yeah.
Like it's really about what we do after it that makes the difference. Do we take it as a failure and let it stop us, paralyze us, and we stop innovating, we stop contributing, those types of things? Or, how do we view it? Do we take it as a learning, and what do we do with that information? How do we actually put it back into what we're doing to make it better or to improve society or ourselves or others? And even in your case as a surgeon, although it's an extreme example, it's about how that surgeon reacts after something goes bad. What do they do to make it right with the family? What do they do to make it right for themselves and society and the medical practice? Maybe there's a huge learning and they change and advocate for something in medicine. So even though it's a very extreme example, and I agree, we need to take things in context of are we saving lives or not? But even in those extreme examples, when it is life-saving, it's about what's done with it. And so I heard that in what you shared, and I love that idea. And I think that's something that people on the audience can listen to and hear and actually implement in their day-to-day lives.
Also an important kind of like adjacent thought on this, which is the other piece of advice that if people say, what would you give advice to yourself as a younger person? And that is like, be the I'll figure it out person. So if you don't know how to do something, but somebody's like, we need someone who can do this, just be like, okay, I'll figure it out. Because you are doing something scared, right? You are doing something with the potential of failure because you don't know how to do it. But in the process of figuring it out, you are learning so much. And yes, there is the risk of failure, but even if you failed, you've learned a bunch in the process and you went into it knowing you didn't know how to do it. So I feel like that's this, if you can embrace the fact that failure might happen and don't run from anything that might result in failure, you will leapfrog your peers, your intellectual capacity, whatever. You will do so much more for what you can learn and do and accomplish because you're pushing yourselves outside those bounds. And I think that's an important kind of piece of the failure equation is knowing you can fail, but I'll figure it out and do it anyway.
Yeah, just the bias for action attitude. So you had mentioned if you could just a few times. If you were to go back and talk to your younger self, what would be the opposite thing that you needed to hear?
I really needed to understand that being different wasn't bad. And I think that, I have this conversation with my son all the time. He doesn't want to be different, even if he knows that being different isn't bad. And so what he needs to see is what good different looks like. And so what I needed to see was I needed examples. And I think the way that I paint this picture for people when I talk about it, if I go talk about neurodiversity at a company or something, is everybody close your eyes and think about the top 3 of all time most famous innovators, scientists, entrepreneurs, mathematicians, artists, architects, whatever. I guarantee you 90% of the people that come to your brain are neurodivergent. And I think that is such an important, powerful message because yeah, they looked different. They acted different. They thought differently than other people. But that's what made them amazing. That's what made them be able to do these amazing things. And I just wish that I had that context as a kid, because if I just knew that, I know that being different isn't bad. People always tell you being different is good, whatever. But you don't want to hear that as a kid. You just want to fit in. If I could see that as oh, hey, being different is friggin' awesome. Look at all the people who are like me. Look what they've done. Amazing. And I think that's, for my son, that's the way that I paint the picture to him. As I say to him, man, if I didn't have ADHD, I couldn't do all these things. And I'll give him examples. And I wish that I had that. I wish that I had more than just someone, well, I didn't know I had ADHD as a kid, so I just felt different and weird. But even if I had known, having someone be like, you have this thing wouldn't have been that helpful without, here's why it's awesome. Here's the strengths that come with that. And that's part of my advocacy journey, is just so other people hear that. So adults hear that. Adults need to hear that too. Adults with that as much as kids do.
Absolutely. And I think today, at least in the corporate workplace and otherwise, I think there's more a little bit of an opening for that. I think there's more of an opening so people can actually start to be more open and honest about it. And then kids can have role models to look to. I think, when you and I were growing up, there wasn't that, right? People were still very stone-faced about this and didn't discuss it. And so I think it's really important that we, again, why I'm so passionate about this podcast and the topic is that as leaders, and I mean that in any context. I mean, parent, soccer coach, corporate leader, entrepreneur, whatever it is you're doing, the invitation to everyone listening is to take that mask off and stop pretending to be something you're not. And that doesn't mean that you're an imposter. It means you're a human being and that we're all imperfect, and lean into those imperfections because that is your superpower. That is what differentiates you, and that's what makes you unique and special.
No question. And I always think about how so much of it is just in the label, right? And here's a perfect example. When parents find out that their kids are gifted, they brag about that, right? Giftedness is neurodiversity. Giftedness is hard. It is not easy to be gifted. I went to a gifted kids school growing up. We are weird. And it's not, I would say 80% of the kids I went to school with were probably on the spectrum or had ADHD or would insert other neurodiversity here. It's called being 2E, twice exceptional, right? Why is giftedness considered a good thing, but dyslexia is a bad thing? When dyslexia makes you think with spatial reasoning, you literally think in 3D. It's amazing. Reading is harder. Okay, don't become a writer, right? Like go build buildings. Like aren't we like when a parent hears their kid is dyslexic, the reaction is, oh, that sucks, or very upset. I mean, my kid went to a school for kids with dyslexia for a couple of years. And so all of the parents, I mean, a lot of them were just, how do we fix this? And it's like, this is how your kid's brain is wired. And parents, probably yours too, because it's why, like, we're not going to fix it. Let's just reframe the way that we talk about it. The same way we do with giftedness. Oh, my kid is gifted. They have an IQ of 138. It's like, oh, cool. My kid with an IQ of 138 really struggles with that because being around kids with regular IQ, they are neurodivergent, right? And I don't see how one is good and one is bad when they're really just the same thing, two sides of the same coin. So it's really about the label and about how we brand neurodiversity as a deficit. Attention deficit disorder. It's a disorder. Autism spectrum disorder. Maybe it's not a disorder. Maybe it's just a different, like some people are left-handed.
And what it really opened my mind was you were talking about it, Becca, is this concept of projection and how much of that is just projection of the parent onto the kid on like, it's not the kid that I need to change. I just don't know how to deal with it. It's me that has the problem. And so I want to change X, or even in corporations and society, it's like and teachers, we try to mold them into like, they're all doing the same thing because I don't know how to handle the different.
And the system, like, and it sounds so strange or whatever when you need to change a system, but it is just, it's about the approach, right? Just like if I went to another country, I would need to look around and adapt to the culture and the customs and the whatever. I don't just go in and be a like American and do everything that like, it's the same in every situation. And it shouldn't be that just because the way you do something as a team leader, I shouldn't get to say, this is the way that I do it, so you're all going to do it this way. And guess what? If my ADHD ass was telling people to do it my way, they would never be able to follow it because my way is very my way. So I feel like, why can't we approach the world that way, where we're all just kind of meeting each other in the middle? And all of the research, by the way, is showing that the way that neurodivergent kids are taught, the way that dyslexic kids are taught to read, the way that ADHD kids are accommodated in classrooms, that's better for all kids. Neurodivergent and neurotypical. All of them are more successful with those strategies. So maybe we could like take a hint and not call it an accommodation and just call it a standard, since we see that it's working for everybody.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. To shift gears a little bit, I know you also do a lot of work with AI, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this topic of imposter syndrome, self-doubt, or even as it relates to your journey with ADHD, and how does it relate to AI for you? Like, what's your interpretation of that?
Oh, I am really looking at AI from it's a tool to help me like any other technology is. And I think there is a lot to unpack in AI that is way above my pay grade and that I am legitimately concerned about, but like, I don't feel like I have any kind of agency to do anything about that. So in the meantime, I use these tools that are at my disposal to make my life easier. And I think that's like the best way to put it is like, just like when we all got laptops and we all got cell phones and the internet, like all of those things were a change in our workflow. And I look at AI like that. And I basically now, anytime I have to do something, I think to myself, like, is there an AI tool that can help me with this? Whether it's like, we're going to summarize something, or I'm fresh out of ideas. Are we going to ideate something? Or can you edit this? Or just proofread. Hey, I've already proofed this. Can you make sure there's no errant periods somewhere? Like, it could be something small. It could be something bigger, right? Like, I was trying to figure out, I wanted to train a GPT and I needed to scrape all of my LinkedIn content. So I figured out how to do that with AI. And so that's on the kind of like work, whatever, how do I do more work better, faster? That's the way I look at it. It's not about replacing my ideas. In fact, I am very almost like rigid about not letting AI replace my ideas, but
That's good.
it makes me so much smarter in other ways. Like, I can become a lawyer if I need to, or, you know, I need to action with a lawyer, but I don't want to pay somebody $1,000 an hour. I literally can go have a conversation with AI and probably get what I need out of that. Or, you know, health stuff, or I have questions about something beyond research, right? Like, I want to do research, but then I also want to have an output from that that doesn't necessarily need to be show ready. Like, there's just so many things in my life that AI has helped me do faster, do better. And I only see that as, it's a little bit scary. I mean, it is a little bit scary to think about how much it will be able to do. But I think we all need to like figure out, how do you not lose your identity in the AI revolution? And then people are like, well, people are getting dumber because they're using AI for things. And I actually feel the opposite. I feel like I'm getting way smarter because, like I said, I'm having conversations with lawyers if I need to, or having conversation. I just signed a contract for a new job, right? My sister's a lawyer. She was busy. She didn't have time to review my contract. So I had Claude review it. We chatted back and forth, made some recommendations. It helped me negotiate my salary and everything. And then went back and talked to my sister, and she was like, frankly, it gave you better advice than I would have. Boom. Right? These tools at my disposal, but you have to learn how to use them. And I think the biggest thing that people if you're sleeping on it, it means that your learning curve is going to be so much bigger whenever you do decide you're going to start using it. So it's like, you don't put at it immediately. Just start integrating ChatGPT into your life, because if you don't, it's going to be like, suddenly you're the grandma when the internet came on the scene and you don't know how to log into Google, right? What is this Google? But you don't want to be that person. And I advocate strongly for my teams to, let's figure out how do we work these into our workflows in ways that are obviously like protecting our data, but productive and helpful. And then we share learnings and we all get smarter from it. So I think it actually has the potential to make us smarter. And then, you know, I look at my son who is very dyslexic, and AI stuff. My daughter wrote a book. Like she was able to use ChatGPT to help create content. She's 8. Create content for a book that then she got graphics and built this whole thing. And now she has like a physical hard copy for a book. And I feel like there's just all of these like use cases for how AI is going to make us smarter.
So that's really empowering. And I love that perspective, because I personally have used it for research on like selling land and, you know, what's the going rate in this county?
Yeah.
And is this too much to ask? Or
like, go read all of Reddit and tell you trends, right? Which is like, that's like asking thousands of people their opinion on something. When yes, you could ask your realtor and you would get her view on this based on her purview, but like, go get crowdsource things now. And it's, it's amazing.
It's super helpful. So in the spirit of working back with your team in this authentic leadership role, what do you think the opportunity is for people like you and I and others to come together to work to share this idea that imperfection is the new normal?
I mean, if I could say one thing that I think will be the most important thing in this next AI revolution, it is authenticity. Like hard stop, that's it. And authenticity means vulnerability. It means truth and honesty and good and bad, right? It's just coming as you are. And I think as a leader, it is my imperative to show up like that because that empowers other people to show up like that. And I don't think that there's anything that makes teams more productive and more coordinated and what's the word I'm looking for? Collaborative than psychological safety. And how do you create psychological safety for your teams? Part of that is showing that you are a human, right? And I think that is the thing that's going to go back to differentiation. That is the thing that is going to differentiate good leaders from great leaders and good teams from great teams. They're going to be the ones who have trust in each other because there is this kind of human element and human connection and communication. And when we fail, we're safe to fail and talk about it and move forward together. Like all of that, just, it really matters. And it is the leader who has to set that example and who has to say, this is how we're going to operate, because if they're not doing it, it's never going to happen. Like it comes from the top. As much as I would love to have a grassroots bottom-up authenticity movement, people don't feel safe to share their real selves unless the boss is doing it. So as much as I can control in my personal life with my kids and my teams and my world, like I show up as I am so that I can empower the other people around me to show up as they are.
Well, thank you for your courage and your vulnerability and everything that you shared with us today, Becca. I think every company could use someone like you who's willing to stand up for the truth and really look at the full picture, the good, bad, and ugly, and show up as your full self and be authentic and empower the people on your team to do the same. And I think that's something that I've seen as a trend that being mandated by the employees post-pandemic. And unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of corporation and their leadership not really responding to it. They're doing, these little HR programs to make people like put a Band-Aid on a cut, but it's not solving, it's not healing, right? It's not solving the problem. And so I really appreciate you spending time here with me today. How can people learn more about you and follow you and just get to know you?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. You can find more about me at BeccaChambers.com or BeccaHasADHD.com if that's easier to remember. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Becca from LinkedIn and I love to connect with people. So find me on LinkedIn. I'm posting multiple times a day, all of my authentic, unfiltered content and thoughts. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Definitely. And I look forward to having you back as well.
I'd be happy to.
A sincere thank you for tuning into the Unworthy Leader podcast, where we embrace imperfection as the leadership strength. I hope today's conversation challenged and inspired you to lead authentically. Together, we're breaking down imposter syndrome and redefining leadership through vulnerability and courage. For show notes, bonus content, and leadership resources, please visit theunworthyleaderpodcast.com. You can follow us on YouTube at The Unworthy Leader Podcast, LinkedIn at Kendra Dahlstrom. Until next time, lead authentically.